Welcome to Wildcast Podcast, another episode coming your way on Apple, Spotify, and Tucson.com. I'm Justin Spears here with my guy, Michael Lev. We'll be talking all things Arizona Wildcats football for this episode because, man, what a win for the Wildcats over the weekend in Salt Lake City. Arizona beating Utah 23-10. First win for the Wildcats in Salt Lake City since 2014 and over a top 10 team. It's the first win for Brent Brennan against the top 10 team. And, Lev, there are so many things that we have to address. We'll also answer some mailbag questions. I know you have some leftover mailbag questions that we'll talk about. I sent out the bat signal and got some great questions. So we'll address all of your questions later on in the podcast. But, Lev, we had our doubts about this Arizona team going into the Utah game because in their first major test of the year at Kansas State, they just didn't look like they had any spirit. And it was on all sides of the ball. On offense, they couldn't get anything going after that first drive. And then on defense, they failed to stop the run. And then special teams, we saw them give up a punt return for a touchdown. The punt was very low, did not look good from Tyler Loop, albeit I think, he is the best punter on the team, in my opinion. But all three phases, Arizona failed. And you did a report card after that game, and you gave out a lot of low grades for that game. And, a lot of people, including myself, thought, man, after that Kansas State game, how are they going to look against Utah? Because Utah's better than Kansas State. And all the things that Arizona struggles in, Utah excels at, like stopping the run, running the football, playing physical, playing clean. And Arizona came in and completely outclassed Utah in every facet of the game. They were able to get to the quarterback and sack Isaac Wilson 3 times. Utah didn't have any. So offense and defensive line, they were awesome in that game against Utah. And then even though Noah Fafita didn't play his best game as a Wildcat, some of the throws that he was able to make there, especially at the end on that final drive or the second to last drive where they scored that touchdown with Kean Burnett. I mean, that throw to Devin Hyatt was a great catch by Devin Hyatt, but a great ball by Noah. And then the ball in the back of the end zone to Kean Burnett. And we talked about it all week long. You've got to get the tight ends involved. And sure enough, Kean Burnett's first touchdown as a Wildcat was a pretty significant one. So all in all, Lev, I just look at this game and I'm like, okay, there's the Arizona team that we thought would be one of the better teams in the Big 12, also college football. A little surprised they didn't get into the AP top 25, but I think another game against Texas Tech at home, a win over the Red Raiders would certainly get them in the AP poll. But, man, what a turnaround for the Wildcats.
I did vote for them in the top 25
20?
this week. 20, I think 22, one spot ahead of Utah, whom they just beat at their place, obviously. We are recording this after Brent Brennan's Monday press conference, and he said the thing that impressed him the most about the game was the physicality that Arizona showed on both sides of the ball. And that was the task. I mean, that was the difficult task for them coming into this game. Can you match the physicality of Utah? Because that's who they are, right? That is in their DNA. We have seen many games between the two of them over the last decade or so where Utah has just kind of imposed its will. And after about 5-10 minutes, you're just like, nope, this is not going to happen. Arizona is just getting mauled. They're just getting physically overwhelmed. And I never got that sense in this game, not one single time. And I think that is really important. That's really important moving forward too, because that was kind of the identity of last year's team, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, they were very stout up front, and that's where it all begins and ends in the sport of football. It is nice to have all those great skill position players, and Arizona has plenty of those as well. But this was a game that was won in the trenches compared to the Kansas State game, which was lost in the trenches in a lot of ways, especially with Kansas State's rushing attack against Arizona's rushing defense. But a great win, an important win. I feel like this turns the heat down on Brent Brennan. I think most of the chatter about him was unjustified, premature, panicky.
Yeah.
This is not his first rodeo, and he proved himself by all the adjustments that he made over the bye week. and we'll get into some of those or maybe all of those by the end of the podcast, but different personnel, different play calls on both sides of the ball, and a different attitude too.
Yeah.
I mean, he was talking about like this idea that he wanted them to have fun out there. And it's always fun when you win, of course, but I don't know, maybe losing that game against Kansas State took a little bit of pressure off the players, even if it cranked it up on Brennan a little bit. Like sometimes it's hard when, like I always say, like in basketball, for example, college basketball, like I don't like if my team is undefeated going into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
You know, it's like an added layer of pressure. Maybe that winning streak was putting pressure on them that maybe they didn't even realize. And I don't know, they just looked like a completely different team from what we saw against Kansas State 2 weeks earlier.
And like I said, they had a sense of pride in their play. And, the fourth down plays I thought were so critical in that game. Arizona, by the way, 0 for 4 on defense with fourth down. Utah did not convert a single fourth down. They were 0 for 4 against the Wildcats. And I think it is the first 0 for game by Arizona's defense with at least 4 or more since Oregon in 2006. So Arizona's defense on fourth down was special. And, those are the kind of plays where we've seen in the past, Arizona gives up a fourth down conversion, Utah scores, the Utes get all sort of momentum. Like there were plenty of opportunities in that game for Utah to get momentum, but Arizona figured out a way to counter it and give them, a punch back. And I thought Takario Davis had potentially his best game as a Wildcat. I know he had some really good games last year, but the game against Utah, and we're talking about 5 pass breakups. I mean, he had 15 all of last year. He had 5 in one game against Utah, and 3 of them were on fourth down plays. So for him, and one of them I think was in the end zone. I think that was the second one.
Yep.
Traden Stukes got the first one, but I thought Takario had his best game as a Wildcat, and he was Big 12 Defensive Player of the Week. That was announced on Monday morning, and there was just a fight in a spirit that we had not seen with this Arizona team. And I agree with you, Lev. I think that, losing and, potentially that losing streak coming to an end, I think maybe that kind of brought Arizona back to the drawing board, and they realized, okay, what is working? What do we need to change? And we'll talk about some of those changes later on in the podcast, but it was, I think, a great win for Brent Brennan and the Wildcats. And, there was a lot of adversity leading up to that game, Lev, both from the loss to Kansas State, the bye week, and also traveling to Salt Lake City. They had a plane issue on Friday afternoon when they're, about to take off. Apparently there was a tire issue, according to Brent Brennan, and the flight was delayed for several hours. And it was looking like maybe Arizona's not going to get out in time on Friday night. And then they were able to find a plane, and they flew to Salt Lake City super late Friday. They ended up eating pasta and cheeseburgers at 1:45 in the morning, and they didn't go to bed until 2:45. And this is a team that operates in the morning. Like they practice in the morning. They always get up early. So I would imagine their internal body clocks received a lot of whiplash. And I think for them, for their sleep schedule to get shifted like that, and for them to come out against Utah, I thought it showed a lot of fight with this team.
Yeah, when I have a tire issue, Justin, I just call AAA. So I don't know what the problem is there. So, and kids are way better at adjusting to difficult circumstances than adults are. I mean, who knows what their hours are that they keep, but they don't need as much sleep. They don't need as much rest as us mere mortals. So regarding Takario Davis, you're an NBA fan, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to make a comp for Takario Davis that might seem ridiculous on the surface, but I'll try to explain it. Victor Wembanyama. Okay. Long arms, crazy long arms, that length. Brent Brennan said the one thing that you hate when you are a receiver is going up against length. Okay. Yeah. Takario Davis, if he is in the right position against you, is able, because of his long arms, he's 6'4", like legit 6'4". He can get his arms around a receiver or in front of a receiver without committing pass interference.
Yeah.
I don't think there was one call against him. And the refs, I liked how the refs
He was a little
officiated.
aggressive.
Yeah, they didn't let both teams get aggressive with in terms of their pass coverage, which I think makes for a better game, better product, personally. But that length was so evident on those plays. Like Utah, the fourth down you referenced earlier, they're like, oh, we got our 6'7" ex-basketball player, tight end. We're gonna isolate him against the cornerback in the end zone. Well, that might work against most guys, but you're not going to find someone who's going to like out rebound Takario Davis.
Yeah.
So that was extremely impressive. I was happy for him because he kind of struggled a little bit in training camp. Didn't look quite right. He might have been dealing with some kind of a groin injury or something in that area. He also might have been feeling the pressure a little bit of like being this projected first round pick.
Yeah.
Brent Brennan mentioned today, like he liked seeing how happy he was, the joy on his face that he experienced. So that's a really good sign. And they're going to need as many good coverage guys as they can find with Texas Tech and Colorado coming up on the schedule. Some really good passing teams in the Big 12 still to come.
All right, let's answer some mailbag questions, shall we?
Yeah.
All right, Lev, you got a few, right?
Yeah. I will start with our frenemy, Greg Thompson. What's your take on Dino Babers? He gave off hostile defensive vibes at his last presser. I was impressed at how Justin kept plugging away and asking solid questions. You think he's feeling the heat from the poor offensive performance so far? Well, it turns out that Brent Brennan has made a change at the offensive coordinator, not the offensive coordinator position, but the play calling duties have changed.
Yep.
He said today to us that Matt Adkins, who was the tight ends coach and I think passing game coordinator,
yep,
is his title, is now the primary play caller. He said that Dino Babers was on board with this. I don't know how that part of it is necessarily true, but Dino is a sort of an elder statesman in that offensive coaching room. Matt Adkins is a relatively young guy coming up. The way Brent Brennan portrayed it was, Dino was kind of a mentor to these guys, and he knew that he'd be a mentor. And they decided with a bye week that it was a good time to do that. My take on this whole thing is that whatever you thought about Brent Brennan being like too nice of a guy to make a change like this, you were wrong, people, right? You were wrong about him. He took a hard look at what was working and what wasn't working, decided that he didn't like the vibe or the mechanics or the results as far as offensive play calling went, and he decided to make a change.
Yep.
That's a bold move. It's not an easy thing to do when you're talking about someone who was your mentor, maybe back in the day, Dino Babers. I'm sure this is not easy for Dino, but when you're the CEO, when you're the boss, you have to make hard decisions sometimes.
Yeah.
And this seems like that's what Brent Brennan has done here, and the results were pretty favorable, obviously.
That's a really hard decision to make because, like you said, Lev, Dino Babers was this, brilliant offensive mind or brilliant offensive coach when Brent was a player. And then Brent became a graduate assistant and was working under Dino Babers. So I can imagine, making a call. And it's not like Dino Babers is receiving like I wouldn't say demotion, maybe in terms of play calling, but Dino is still going to be heavily involved in the offense and is still going to be a part of the game plan and in getting these guys prepared. And then obviously the game, it's a collaborative effort, but the guy who's signaling the plays, the guy who's ultimately having the say-so in what they do, that's going to be Matt Adkins. And I know that wasn't an easy decision for Brent Brennan. Because Dino Babers is a longtime coach, has been a mentor for Brennan for a long time, but I think it says a lot about the maturity of Dino Babers. And again, I don't know everything that's going on behind the scenes, but for a younger guy to come in and have that kind of game and for Arizona to win, I think it says a lot about Brent Brennan and the staff. And, Matt Adkins is a great offensive mind. He's been working under Brennan for several years, going back to San Jose State. He is originally from Oregon, I believe, and played quarterback at Southern Oregon, if I'm not mistaken, and then like went into coaching, and his dad was coaching at a Swedish football league. And then when he wasn't coaching at Southern Oregon as a positions coach, he was coaching overseas in Sweden. So he was coaching a lot of games. I think he said in like one calendar year, he coached like 31 games or something like that, which is just valuable experience for any young coach. And we heard from Brent Brennan, we've heard from the players that this guy knows his stuff. And you can get that when you talk to him. And hopefully we're able to talk to him at some point this season. But this is a really good guy. I mean, I think you and I, Lev, even talked about like after one of his press conferences, we both were like, at some point, he's going to be the offensive coordinator, whether it's here or somewhere else. And it looks like he's going to get those play calling duties here moving forward. So
Yeah,
good move.
It wasn't a flawless offensive performance. I mean, they only scored 23 points. They bogged down in scoring range and had to settle for field goals.
But there was pre-snap stuff.
Yeah, they're still a little too reliant on big plays. I felt like maybe they could have run the ball more. Like Hedrick or Ricino was hot, and it felt like they needed to really seemed like they needed to feed him a little bit more. But you like the end result, of course. You like that the tight end, Kean Burnett, was heavily involved in this game. I mean, he had 9 catches for 90-something yards in his career. And he had 5 for 76 and a touchdown in this game. This thing that we've been waiting for a long time. It seemed like it's finally happening. And as Brennan said after the game, like the more you can get other guys involved, the more it should make it easier for T-Mac.
Yeah.
Like they had clearly were getting the ball to T-Mac right off the bat. Like it was a game plan thing. 6 catches for 50 yards, all in the first quarter. Didn't have another catch after that. I mean, we're not able to see like all of the coverage that he's facing. There were a couple opportunities, but teams are going to double team him. They're going to give safety help. They're going to drop linebackers into his area. That should create opportunities for others. Matt Atkins, he's the tight ends coach. It's not surprising that the tight ends were a little bit more involved in this game. I have one more for you, Justin,
Sure.
from my side here. This is from before the game. Why do they not use Flo as an edge rusher on passing downs? What's your level of confidence that Babers can improve? He has all the talent needed to run an effective offense, but his play calling is what's preventing us from putting points on the board. Obviously, we have addressed the Babers issue. The Flo issue is one that we have talked about many times, and I don't really know where to go from here on this. Like these 2 different coaching staffs have worked with this player who's got a lot of talent. He's got a lot of athletic ability. He's got a lot of enthusiasm, but it doesn't seem like everything is clicking for him to the point where they trust him to put him out there on defense. They showed a different defensive look in this game. I'm sure we will talk to Dwayne Aquina about it this week, and he'll give us more details about what that is, but they kind of moved their splits. They split their defensive linemen wider. They positioned a linebacker like in the middle of the field in a position where it looked like he might rush. And sometimes he would, but sometimes he would drop back. And that uncertainty was very disconcerting for a freshman quarterback in Isaac Wilson and caused them all kind of problems. Blitz rate was higher, and it was Tay Brown and it was Jacob Manu at linebacker. It was not Justin Flo. Could he, carve out a role for himself later on this season or at some point in his career? Maybe, but I feel like that ship has kind of sailed to a degree when it comes to utilizing Flo in that role. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Dwayne will surprise us at some point and he'll sneak him in there.
And then the second half of the season becomes the Flo show. And we start to see more of him. But yeah, I mean, he's a really good blitzer. And it seemed like out of all the linebackers in training camp this year, the best blitzer was Flo. And that's what prompted our conversation about Flo as an edge rusher or the spy if they ever use the double eagle flex defense. And they blitzed all night long for the most part. I think it was nearly 46%?
20 out of 44 dropbacks.
So we're talking about, nearly 46% of Isaac Wilson's dropbacks. They were bringing the house. They were bringing the heat. And so maybe at some point they bring in Justin Flo, but I don't know. I'm not optimistic at this point.
Yeah, the blitz rate was really noticeable and noteworthy because in the previous 2 games, they blitzed only 11 out of 63 dropbacks.
Yeah.
So, like, major increase in that area, which I think is a smart move when you're facing a freshman quarterback. I don't know if they would have done that against Cam Rising, who, as Brent Brennan joked, has a decade of college football experience. Like, there's nothing he hasn't seen. Isaac Wilson, there's a lot of things he hasn't seen, and he obviously was not ready for that particular look that they showed on defense.
You got any more mailbag questions?
I do not. No.
Okay. All right. Let's tap into my mailbag. All right. So this one comes in from David H. Do you think Risino will get an even larger role? Looked really solid. Yeah, he did. Had a couple of big runs, including a 36-yarder, which helped set up the Jeremiah Patterson touchdown there in the red zone, which, by the way, like that sequence right there, I'm like, that's the offense that we saw on that first drive against Kansas State. It was, you got run, you got passing plays. It was just a very nice balance. And also Jeremiah Patterson motioning inside and then going outside. Like, that's the creativity that you want to see with the weapons that Arizona has. And you didn't really see that in the first 3 games. It looked just like a lot of guys lined up. They take the snap, they run their routes, or they do their assignments, and that's that. There wasn't a lot of creativity or pre-snap stuff. But yeah, Kedrick Risino, I mean, I always have to remind myself that Jonah Coleman's not on this team, because every time he touches the ball, I'm like, that is Jonah Coleman. He wears number 3. They have similar builds. I think they both wear visors too, and their running style is exactly the same. And I'm like, that is Jonah Coleman, but it's Kedrick Risino. And I think with, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt and his uncertainty with the NCAA and his eligibility status, Kedrick Risino will certainly get a larger role in. With the 4-game threshold of red shirts, we're at that point now in this year. What's going to happen with Rayshon Speedy Luke? Is he going to, play more, or is he going to redshirt after this week? And I think with the running backs right now, the way they are, I think Kedrick Risino will certainly get a lot more touches, and he looked great against Utah.
Yeah, Brett Brennan was asked about the redshirt thing today. I don't know if it was you who asked him or somebody else, but he was kind of like, if you're playing now, you're going to play. He didn't seem too into that, like, just play someone 4 games. He was talking mostly about freshmen, but he was sort of like, if they're out there and they're ready, let's play them. Seemed to be his attitude. But regarding Kedrick Risino specifically, I really like his running style. He's very physical. He's big. Like, when we saw him come into the interview room a couple weeks ago, I think we all remarked, like, this guy looks like a linebacker.
Yeah.
Like, he's really thick. But he's also fast. Like, he's got that combination of the 2 things. I like how square he is to the line of scrimmage when he runs. So definitely like to see more of him, like to see him get into that 10 to 12 range in terms of how many carries per game. I think Quali Conley be a very effective 3rd down back. He's smart. He knows the system. He's a good receiver. That'd be a good role for him. And Speedy, I thought had a really good all-around game. He had a tackle on punt coverage.
Yeah, he did.
Really good pass block. And he also had a good run. I think they gained like 12 yards. So they're finding ways to get him involved. But yeah, Kedrick Risino, he was a 4-star recruit. He started his career at Ole Miss. Clearly, this guy has got a lot of ability, and we're starting to see it a little bit.
Staying on the offensive side of the ball, this one comes from Rhymes with Look. Why are we not throwing more short, quick passes? They work, and they get more wide receiver tight ends involved. I feel like Noah has been trying to throw deeper this season, especially to his longtime buddy, Tetairoa McMillan. Kean Burnett, like, his catches were long passes like that. I think his first catch was amazing. And then the one, of course, in the end zone, that was a perfectly thrown ball by Noah. But yeah, a lot of deep passes, I feel like, from Noah Fafita this year. Now that's a really good question. And honestly, I thought that we'd see a lot more. Speaking of Rayshon Speedy Luke, him in the passing game, I mean, the couple of touches that he had in that game, he looked really effective as a wide receiver. So maybe as Matt Atkins continues his play calling duties, maybe we see a lot more creativity in the first 5 to 10 yards in the passing game for Arizona.
Noah Fafita's ADOT, his average depth of target, is up almost 2 yards this season over last year. It was 7.8 last year, and now it's 9.7. So it's not anyone's imagination. I did put out a stat a couple weeks ago that looked at all the different segments of the field, which they break it down like outside the numbers, behind the line of scrimmage, 0 to 9 yards, etc. There were definitely less passes in the middle of the field in the shorter areas than there have been. Not really sure why. I mean, I was watching a lot of Big 12 games this past Saturday, and so many teams use that like fake handoff RPO slant pass play,
Yep.
and it like works almost every time. You'd think that'd be a really effective weapon with someone like T-Mac, who I think, by the way, is going to go off against Texas Tech. We'll talk about Texas Tech later in the week, but I just have a feeling that we're in for one of those monster T-Mac games. But they had a little bit more success in the bubble screen game, which I thought they were really good at last year. And Jed Fish was really good at getting the right people out there to block. Like he'd often, like Tanner McLaughlin would like motion outside, and then they throw the bubble screen. So you'd have that big body tight end out there to block. For the most part, their bubble screen game has not been very effective. It hasn't been a major part of what they do. I think that's another way that they could do it. But I think that the person who asked that question is talking more about the middle of the field. The slants, maybe hook routes, those types of things. It does seem like it's mostly downfield and mostly toward the sidelines. So again, that'll be something to watch moving forward. Like, is that going to be something that changes, or is that just how this offense is going to look?
Our next question comes in from Frank Pones, and Frank asks, how hurt is Stooks, and will his absence be a downfall for our secondary? Having Stooks helps. Stooks is a really good open field tackler, a really athletic, kind of a Swiss Army knife defensive back for the Wildcats. It's a significant loss. But with that being said, Arizona also has a really good player in Genesis Smith, who was just kind of like the sixth man of the group, a guy who's, waiting for his opportunity for the last couple of years. Had a interception in the game on Saturday against Utah. I think his third, right, of his career. He had his first one in the Alamo Bowl. His second one was on against New Mexico in the season opener. Good for Genesis to keep his helmet on after the interception. I think he he learned his lesson this time around. But having a long, lengthy defensive back, you talked about it earlier, Lev, having that kind of size and that frame, that's what you want for a defensive back. So Trayden Stooks, that leg injury, it doesn't look good, right? He had a leg sleeve on the sideline. We don't know what his status is moving forward, but it's a big loss, but you got a pretty good one in Genesis Smith.
Yeah, here's the effect of that, right? Like you said, Genesis Smith is a very good substitute for Trayden. He's built similarly.
Yeah.
He's cross-trained he's played both free safety and that star position, which is a nickel defensive back. He's basically as good as any of the starters, right? The problem is if someone else gets injured, then you have to play someone that maybe isn't quite as on the same level as the other guys. Like we saw in that Kansas State game, they were already without Dalton Johnson, right? So Genesis was playing for him, and then Stooks gets injured during that game. Then they have to go to Owen Goss, who seems like a good special teams player. He was an effective player at his previous stop at Colgate, but man, he looked out of sorts and out of place against Kansas State. I mean, they were going after him in the pass game. He was struggling with his run fits. It's the domino effect, right? You have like no margin for error anymore when you're missing one of your guys, and you have to, if there's another injury, then maybe you're in trouble. But I think the fall off from Stooks to Genesis is pretty minimal.
All right, last one, Lev.
Yeah.
This one comes from Super Mills. I feel like Arizona would have beaten Rutgers. What do you think? I think so because
I'll tell you what. I'll
they
tell
got
you
a
one reason
kicker.
why. Yes.
Shout out to Tyler Loop. 3 field goals they missed in that game, Lev. And then meanwhile, Tyler Loop, he made 3 field goals. One of them was a 53-yarder. I didn't agree with the call to kick the field goal there towards the end. That seemed
Agreed. Yep.
a little reckless, but they wanted to try it out, and he barely missed it. But yeah, I think Jet Fish would love to have a Tyler Loop on his team right now.
Yeah, I know. I definitely made some comments in some of our group chats about that. Washington should have thrown all its NIL money to get Tyler Loop to come up there. And people were saying too on Twitter. I thought this was a good point that like it's maybe a market inefficiency or thing that you could capitalize on. Like it's a very specific skill set, place kicker, and there's only a handful of guys in college who are really good at it. Maybe that is a good place to spend some NIL money. Like especially the way college football is now. So many of these games come down to the wire, right? I mean, how many games have we seen so far where the kicker has missed at the end to send the game to overtime or win the game or whatever? Like it happens all the time. There aren't a lot of Tyler Loops out there in college football. Arizona is sure to have one. A note about him: there are 2 kickers in the country who have still have a 100% touchback rate, and he's one of them. So has not been a single kickoff return against Arizona this year with Tyler Loop booting the ball.
The golden leg.
Incredible.
Yeah, he's
got another awesome game. Yeah, and he's got another game at altitude coming up against BYU. So I would fully expect that streak, unless there's some crazy wind going on in Tucson this Saturday or in Provo the next Saturday. I would expect that streak to continue for at least 2 more weeks.
Afternoon game in Provo. How about that?
Oh my gosh. What an adjustment for you, Justin.
The heavens,
not going to be up until 3 a.m.
I'm thinking the heavens right now.
Hey, before we go, tell us a little bit about your trip.
Oh, Salt Lake City was great. It was a lot of fun. Very, very nice city. I mean, it was a little strange walking around downtown and seeing people dressed up like Pokemon characters and all these other different cartoons and anime stuff because it was Comic-Con. So you saw people dressed up like superheroes and comic book characters and Pokemon. So walking around downtown Salt Lake City was certainly an interesting time, but Salt Lake City is a great, great town. And the people there couldn't have been nicer. And Rice-Eccles Stadium is gorgeous. Like that is, I don't know about you, Lev, but like if we're ranking like the previous Pac-12 schools, Rice-Eccles has to be towards the top, no? Outside of like Autzen Stadium?
Setting, yes. It is a great setting, and they have a great crowd. They've done some work on the stadium the last couple of years to make it a little nicer and more modern. Press accommodations are excellent up there. And also it was 81 degrees at kickoff, and I'm sure it only got cooler from there. It's been like over 100 here in Tucson still as we inch toward October, which is just kind of nuts. There's a reason we have all these late night kickoffs here in Tucson. It's just kind of a necessity.
In the first half of the schedule.
Yeah, for sure. But well, hey, glad you had a good time.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Really unexpected, but pleasant surprise of an outcome.
Yeah.
And now,
and again, like I was waiting for the Utah, I wouldn't say avalanche, but the Utah momentum to swing the other way because, when they cut the lead to 1 possession and that drive where Noah Fafita found Devin Hyatt and then ultimately Kean Burnett, like their heels were not in the back of the end zone, but like
they were 13-yard line.
They were deep in their own territory.
Yep.
And the Utah crowd was just getting amplified. That stadium pulse in college football 25? Well, that stadium pulse was just like going off the charts. Like it was redlining for sure. And I'm like, oh man, this is where Arizona's going to throw an incomplete pass. They're going to have to punt it away. And then Utah is going to score a touchdown. And that's going to be the one that puts them ahead and wins them the game. And then Arizona's going to try to drive down the field, and then they're not going to get anything going. Utah's going to stop them because that's just what Utah does. And then Arizona is going to have a disappointing loss. Like they clawed, they fought, they did everything they could. I actually had 2 headlines, Lev, the way the fourth quarter was heading. And it was Arizona won, and they fought, they clawed, they did everything they could, but it was not enough. Like I had 2 leads. I was getting ready for both outcomes, and then Arizona scored that touchdown with Kean Burnett, and then the stop afterwards, and I'm like, oh my goodness, like they're going to win this game. So just a great win for Arizona.
I mean, you mentioned it earlier. It wasn't the best game that Noah Fifita has played, but those were probably the best 2 passes he's made as an Arizona Wildcat. I mean, those 2 throws were just, considering the circumstances, the air yards.
Yeah.
I mean, 3rd and 11, both of them, crowd going completely crazy. He got hit on the first one in the leg.
Yeah.
Like had to stand in the pocket. I mean, like dropped it perfectly into Devin Hyatt's arms. And then the second one, felt a little pressure, rolled to the right. There was the Fifita, someone from the Fifita family posted a video where you could see, and Kean talked about this after the game when you asked him, it was supposed to be, it started out as a corner route, and then he saw Noah roll out and he broke it off and he went just straight up the field toward the end zone, just dropped it, like I said, right between the 2 8s on his jersey. Like
perfect.
It's incredible. Like, and hey man, that's what kind of we've come to expect from Noah Fifita at this point. He's that guy.
Greatness. All right. That'll do it for this episode of the Wildcast podcast. Arizona with a huge win over the Utah Utes, 23-10 in Salt Lake City. And the Wildcats are in a tie for 4th place in the Big 12 standings. There's a 3-way tie for first. Arizona is still one of the only undefeated teams left in Big 12 play. And, well, they got a team that's tied for first right now in the Texas Tech Red Raiders. They are a really good team, high-scoring offense, so it could be a shootout in Tucson, Arizona. So it's going to be a fun one on Saturday at Arizona Stadium. 8 p.m. kickoff. We'll actually preview that game and some other Big 12 games later on in the week. Hopefully our guy Brett Fair can join us on this podcast for Big 12 Bonanza. All right, that is Michael Lev. I'm Justin Spears. We appreciate you guys for listening and watching. And as always, don't forget to subscribe to the Wildcast podcast.